Rigel of the storm. Okay. Rigel, brother, how's it going? Welcome to Iblis Manifestations, man. It's a real pleasure to have you on the podcast. How you doing?
Good, man. Thank you very much for having me. It's very good to be on set.
Yeah, it's pleasure. Pleasure. I mean, we've already had a few of these that were unrecorded whilst we were on tour quite recently, so I figured let's try and extend that for the listeners of this podcast. We tend to go into the nitty and gritty, and I figured you'd be the perfect guy to talk about. But obviously, first and foremost, it was really an honor and a pleasure to share the stage with you guys for the run that we recently did between TRIVAX and Diocletian. It was a blast to meet you all, and yeah, it was awesome, man. Fucking killer, and just very pleasantly surprising how well I think we all got along, and the fact that you were all totally fine with me being the weirdo who doesn't drink or anything.
No, likewise, man. You guys are really good to tour with, and I really enjoyed it. Unfortunately, it was only for that small segment. I wish it was the whole thing. It would have made it a lot more. I don't know. The in jokes might have got pretty crazily out of hand. I think if it was like I think it was like 30 shows in the end we did. But
yeah.
But likewise, man. It was a really good time, and it's unfortunate it was so short. So I'm glad that we can catch up in this fashion.
I know it's
do
one
some
of
serious talking.
Fuck yeah, absolutely. No, it was definitely quality over quantity, but yeah, I'm grateful that we got to do it, man. There's always that fucking somber feeling when everyone goes home and it's like, fuck, when's the next time I'm going to see these cunts, so yeah. But no, it was great, man. And yeah, I'm officially, that this may be a bit of an inside joke, but I'm trying my best to get a sponsorship by the Mexican Magic sprays nowadays. So,
It's amazing stuff, man. I'm glad. I'm surprised how many people. Well, I'm surprised that less people, how few people have heard of it, given like how awesome this stuff is, right? But also like how many. I'm into a lot of weird stuff, right? Like obscure things. My taste is very eclectic. So sometimes I introduce people to things of all types, right? And they're like, oh, this, right, it's not for me, right? But how universal that is with a lot of people, and it's very good for you, right? It's a health, it's a medicine, really, So yeah.
The way you guys. Honestly, man, the way you guys introduced it, I was like, fucking hell, this is going to be some kind of hardcore psychedelic drug, that I'm going to think, that I am the cousin of the planets or something like that. But it's actually this, you sold it to me as quote unquote Mexican magic, but it's actually just this Mexican root that only grows over there. And it's actually an antiseptic, an antioxidant, and it's good for, any kind of like throat pain, any infections, which was especially helpful since I lost my voice on the last day. And, and yeah, it's quite good. I've already been through, I think, one small bottle since we did
Nice.
the tour. Yeah.
I'm glad it was easy for you to get. I mean, it looks like it's quite a bit more expensive outside of Mexico to get your hands on, but it's it's like I said, it's not a very common kind of thing. So I'm glad you managed to. But yeah, it's great. Purely as a recreational kind of thing, but also like for really definitely for like health and throat health. Very very good substance. So yeah.
Yeah. How do you say it for people who don't know what we're talking about? Is it Shilquagu or something like that?
Shilquahue, which I believe is Nahuatl, which I'm Shilquahue.
Shilquahue. There we go.
Is Nahuatl. I'm terrible at pronouncing both the words and the word itself, but that's the kind of pre-Hispanic language of primarily the Aztec kind of area. So it's a word from there, but Helopsis long. Peepsis, I think. I'm not quite sure.
Longipe
is the scientific name for it, or they call it like, yeah, it's one. And like in sometimes in like Spanish they call it raíz de oro. It's like the golden root. It's another name that goes for. But so a few names, but that's Chilquahue is the actual one. And seeing it like it only originates from that one particular part of Mexico, I guess that is the official name, right?
Absolutely, man. Yeah, it's very interesting and it's very cool, and I don't think most people who are listening to this have tried it, so I do recommend it, it's fun. It's fun. Like you said, there's a party in your mouth. So I'm very excited to talk to you, man, and there's a variety of reasons for that, and we've, like I said, we've already kind of started the conversation in private earlier. But and I gotta give heads up to the people who are tuning into this podcast right now. If you think that you're gonna get an hour and a half, 2 hours of us talking about war metal, you're probably gonna be disappointed. Because there's a lot more interesting things going on here. So I want to start that by just asking you about how your recent presentation went. Was it in Arnhem in Netherlands?
Yeah, in Arnhem in the Netherlands.
Cool. We played there just last year, actually, in that city.
Yeah, it was like we played there was it like 4 weeks before the actual conference? So it was kind of a nice coincidence in terms I got to check out where I was speaking and sort of a few little administrative things while I was there. So but yeah, no, it was good. This was my fifth, sixth kind of Bitcoin conference talk that I've given. Like I started just before COVID, and then obviously COVID happened and there wasn't a lot of stuff happening until kind of 2020, the end of 21 really. And so I started again doing it in 2022. And so I've done a bunch since then. And I try and do so 3 a year or 2, 3 a year, depending on, kind of things. Like there's a lot of people in the space who just do every fucking conference and give the same talk all the time, and that's not really my ambition. I want to try as much as I can. I mean, the more you do them, you realize that there's a middle ground to be had here, but give individual ones that have some they're like individual pieces of art, if you like, if I'm not being too pretentious saying that, rather than just repeating the same sort of thing. But good. I mean, that one was like a smaller kind of conference, and a lot of it was just the fact that it was the week after Europe. I was like, oh, I know the organizers and everything, and I was like, hey, I'm going to be here. Can I slip in the program somewhere? And they had the last talk of the day. So it's yeah, and it was good. I mean, it was a little rushed in the terms of I think I went a ride, but when I'm writing these things, it's quite hard to write them and to get. I mean, if you're giving a technical talk, right, it's pretty simple where you put some bullet points on the screen and you talk about them from memory, and generally, you might lose a thing here or forget to talk about something there, but generally it's fine, right? But when you're given these kind of more inspirational, philosophical kind of talks, you've got to really practice the hell out of it and get it, because you're creating this train of logic, and if you forget something, the whole house of cards kind of comes down, right? And so, I kind of thought I've got 5 weeks on the road, I'll be able to write in my spare time, which of course was very deluded thinking in retrospect. So I had to really cram it in the last week. But I think it came out pretty good. But this one here, I mean, coming back to what I was saying before, I think kind of come to the realization that I want to, whether I would give the exact same thing again or heavily repurpose it and kind of use the 80%, 60% of the content and give a different angle, but kind of do that. Not sure. So even if it was for a smaller crowd and there was some aspects of it maybe could have been slightly bit more this or that, it's also a way just to kind of playing a song, right? And imagine instead of writing a whole song in the jam room and then going out and performing it. And I guess, and I hear this is kind of how it used to be more like the 60s, 70s, 50s, right? Where they kind of write a song. I guess you kind of do this with bands too. You write a song and you play it a few times. You're yeah, this part's cool, but this part kind of sucks. And then you kind of steal it out, repurpose it into a new song, right? So, I'm just trying to get my head around this as well. Because I used to do speaking in a sense, and that I was doing a course for people that were on the benefit and wanted to start a business, and that was pretty much just public speaking to a group of people every day for for them, group of them for 6 weeks in a stretch. So I've got some experience of this, but writing your own kind of talks and giving them in this thing is a new kind of thing. And obviously, I've got a lot of experience with doing that with music in a performance and compositional sense, but this is something kind of different. I'm still kind of getting my head around how to do it well and what is the best way to do it in the context of all these kind of things. So yeah. So anyway, sorry, long answer, short answer, good, went well.
No, that's great. I mean, the first thing that I kind of want to unpack, I mean, first of all, actually, that's amazing to hear your take on it, where you're referring to it as art, just simply giving a seminar, because I think it is actually that, To me, podcasting is an art form because it's something that's different every time, and it has so many different little sentiments that you got to pay attention to. So for anyone who's listening to this right now who has absolutely no fucking idea what we are talking about, exactly what is it that these seminars are about that you're talking about?
So I mean, the conference in question was called Adopting Bitcoin, and it is a Bitcoin themed conference, and there are 3 of them now. This is the 3rd one. Originally, it started something in El Salvador after they legalized or made Bitcoin legal tender in 2021. And then the guy did it kind of franchised it in a sense, or kind of branded out to where there was one in South Africa now annually. And I'm not sure if this one in Arnhem is going to be annually or every other year or something, but that's it. But basically, yeah. So, I mean, to give the context and the background, I got interested in Bitcoin in 2014, and I don't know, should I just tell my whole story about that, maybe?
Yeah, please. I'm very curious to know your full background on this and how you got invested into this whole thing. No pun intended.
Yeah. So to me, how I got interested in Bitcoin was, I used to be a police officer for 10 years, and one day I was reading the news and I came across this article about this thing called the Silk Road. And this is probably a good opportunity for me to just say to you, when I go through and I'm talking about this kind of stuff, it's like imagine you're telling someone about metal that knows nothing about metal. You're so deep in it, right? A lot of the time there's these things which you think everyone knows or understands, and you can just talk about terms or things as if people understand. You're like, what the hell is that? So if I do, as I'm going forward, if I bring in this kind of stuff, please interrupt me and say what the hell is that? Or I don't think people know, right? But Absolutely. The Silk Road, I'll start with that.
Silk Road was the sort of the online black market, wasn't it? Where you could basically
online,
go and...
Yeah, so this was a thing where it cropped up 2012, I think, into 2011, where basically there was a market online where you could buy drugs, counterfeit software, all sorts of illegal stuff online through this market, right? And how it worked was through a privacy browser or a privacy protocol called Tor, which basically meant that you couldn't identify someone's IP. Traditionally, if you go and look at something illegal, they can usually find out through your internet service provider who you are, where you are, and things like that, right? Or other details as far as the privacy hygiene or your digital hygiene about things like cookies or other stuff you might leave that allow them to identify who the user is, right? So Tor is a protocol developed by the US Navy originally, but is used by a lot of privacy activists and things like that as a way to kind of make themselves anonymous online. It's used quite a lot in oppressive regimes and things like that as a way to communicate without where the government heavily controls the internet. It's a way to get around these kind of things, right? So they use Tor as a way to have the internet a website, right? It's a very traditional e-commerce kind of website like eBay or something like that. But what was being sold was drugs and all sorts of other illegal stuff, and this
you could sorry to interrupt your flow, but I remember you could literally buy anything on there. You could even buy assassination services on there, which at the time would well,
this is a very interesting. I don't want to get too I'm going to get massively diverted all over the place.
Yeah, sure. But my personal
Silk Road is an interesting one.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just saying that. Sorry to interrupt you. My personal experience of Silk Road was just that, I had friends of mine who would basically buy and order LSD from there, and then it would actually show up to their house in postage. Now, I know they had a massive crackdown of it. Was it 2014 or 15, where you basically, that's kind of when it went down. But yeah, please carry on.
Yeah, so I mean, Silkworm is important in that, like, the guy that created that had like a really ideological vision, and so that this is actually a point of contention, is that they alleged that you could buy and sell assassination services on there when that actually wasn't true. But anyway, you could buy all sorts of legal stuff, right? And it was an e-commerce site where it wasn't the guys running the site that was selling this. It was like, but vendors, buyers and sellers could sign up. So if you had a product, you can sign up, create an account, like on eBay, right? And like on eBay, the person that ran the site derived some, a cut of the sales there, right? So the site ran for, I believe it was to the tune of almost like 2 years. And right on those, like the US government and the NSA and all these people could see this was happening, and they couldn't shut it down, which was pretty amazing, right? So Tor enabled like the site to work, but of course, if you were sending, paying via bank transfer, PayPal, something like that, it'd be very easy to shut this down too, right? You'd just simply, follow the movements of money, and you'd be able to track people down. And so Bitcoin was a thing that allowed this to happen, because Bitcoin is a decentralized peer-to-peer form of money where like no one controls it. It's kind of like a thing where everyone and no one is running it and is in charge of it. And so Bitcoin was a way that you could send money to someone else and no one could stop that money being sent. And if you were careful with the privacy side of things, no one could trace who that money was from, right? So, how they eventually got the guy in the end was just old-fashioned detective work, and they managed to like track down the servers and shut them down that way through some sloppiness of that, where he slipped up and left a few clues that they managed to track down. But the core thing about Bitcoin and Tor didn't change, and they couldn't stop what was going on. And because I was a cop for 10 years, to me this just fucking blew my mind. I was like, wow, this is incredible that this thing could operate, and that these level of things could not stop this down. And so to me, straight away, I thought, and this is happening, and indeed is happening today, was this is how North Korea or Russia are going to get around monetary sanctions. This is how all sorts of people are going to conduct all sorts of black market trade, right? This is like nuclear weapons money, where if you have it, like no one can stop you, right? And so straight away I was super interested, and primarily it was like the darknet markets, so I went on there. This time, this was after Silk Road got shut down, but afterwards, and to this day, there's hundreds of other ones that have sprung up in its place because it's a very lucrative market. So I jumped on one of these other ones, and I bought shit like DMT and when I say get LSD, all sorts of other stuff, right? And this arrives in your fucking letterbox 2 weeks later from who knows where, some other foreign country, right?
Yep.
And this kind of blew my mind. I got like a DMT in New Zealand, where I was living at the time. Like you can't get that. Like the first time I ever got a drug, like every time you've ever done a drug, right, some guy's like, hey man, you want to try this? Yeah, you put the thing in this and you smoke like this or whatever. The first time I got no idea how the fuck I'm supposed to do this. I got to go online and look, right? It just blew my mind, right? So to me, that really,
and
when the penny
but
dropped,
just for reference, setting up DMT
Mm-hmm.
and smoking it is pretty difficult. Like you need someone who knows their shit just to set it up. Even if you're like just using a vaporizer, it's not fucking straightforward.
Yeah, it was a hard thing to do. So anyway, so that like fully got me hooked on it, right? And so I started, really being interested and exploring the space, and then I looked at the price side of things as well. That when I got interested, it was like late 2014, and the price was so $300-$400 a Bitcoin, and it had been 1,000. And if you go back, I mean, it was worth nothing and up to like 2011, and then had this meteoric rise. So I'm also thinking, well, this could wait one day, maybe get back to $1,000, which of course is much higher now. So that is primarily to me like the freedom aspect of it. I just felt like this. I identified with it as like, this is my money. But also the financial investment side of it is a big one, and it's totally changed my life in that sense, because as soon as I dropped it, I just put everything I had, all my money, which at the time was not a lot because I was self-employed and like struggling to get myself off the ground. But I put everything I had into Bitcoin because it just to me it was just such an obvious bet. And so since then I have been like slowly spending more and more of my time reading about and get involved, and then I started, that got me to like get into computer programming, and then I started working in this space, and then started talking at conferences. And so that's kind of how I got to that point of like giving that talk. So that's my backstory behind it.
This is really fascinating. I guess the thing that really defines it and sets it apart, because I'll admit, it's actually a topic I'm fairly new to, at least, like everyone knows about Bitcoin, everyone knows about cryptocurrencies, but it's just sort of like, it's not something you pay that much attention to. But from the conversations that you and I have had about it, and from everything that you've told me, I think the ultimate sort of conclusion of it, or rather what makes it what it is the fact that it's decentralized, So hypothetically speaking, if you're in a situation, especially in the world that we're living right now, where we are very much going towards a Chinese kind of system, with social credit score systems and, scary shit that governments can actually impose on people, and then, what was that meme, where the girl is like running, and then she's like, it's year 2030 and my electric cars just switched off because the government found something I said on Twitter 8 years ago or something like that, because I didn't want to eat bugs. So, that's that's the meme. But essentially, what it actually is that you get to have access to finances and trading in a way that is sort of outside of the matrix that already exists. I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly or if the understanding is correct, at least.
No, I mean, I think you've got a good grasp of it. But here's what's important to say, like to preface that and to frame what you said, right? It's like Bitcoin is an open technology, and anyone can decide what it is. Really, it's just like a protocol. And this is my vision of it. But what it can be within certain restrictions and rules about how it operates is very much for the users to decide, right? And that's the most important thing to remember. And I believe, and that's certainly what interests me and why I work in the space and why I'm so interested in it, is that exactly as you say, it's a tool for freedom. And the world that we are moving to today is a world where more and more of our decisions and our options are like these Hobbesian choices, right? Where, you have the illusion of choice, but really it's only what the algorithm lets you see or choose. And outside of those choices, you're free to choose a green car or a blue car, to eat at McDonald's or, to eat at Carl's Jr. or something, right? But, as far as real freedom goes, in a lot of ways, that is becoming more and more restricted. And that's partly because of our reliance on technology, right? If you look at the way we live our life today, almost like everything that we do is conduited through technology. Like, how much of your day-to-day life happens through this thing? Like, I would guess something to the tune of like 90, if not 99% happens through your telephone.
The whole thing. I would say that running a band is 95% in your phone and 5% through a guitar. Mm-hmm. So,
And so that phone itself, like, do you have any insight? Do you have any say into like how it works, what it lets you do, how it is constructed, what it subtly suggests or subtly encourages you not to do based on the way that it's designed, and the applications within that on a whole nother level? Do you have any insight? Do you have any control? No. These things are controlled by corporations, by individuals, by people, that you have no say, no connection, and no real recourse with either. And that, more and more of the way that where our world is going is where these technocrats control our lives. And again, it's more like a Brave New World rather than a 1984 kind of solution, right? Where everyone's happy and everyone feels satisfied, and they don't want for things, rather than this horrible oppressive kind of world where it's very obvious. But what is, if you really want to make an independent choice, like, your options are very limited. And so, the beauty of Bitcoin is, I think, is that it is something which tells a fundamentally different story about what technology is for us than these things, right? Than what everyone seems to know and understand. You give away your privacy, you give away your data, you give away your freedom in exchange for convenience, right? And as you said, like, I understand a little. I think a lot of people understand a little about what these things are, but they don't have a profound, deep level of understanding about how they work and all the ins and the outs. And that's somewhat the nature of it, right? Is like, there's this meme in Bitcoin called proof of work, which, it's a whole nother talk to go about what that means. It's related to mining, but the general idea is that, you get out what you put in. And I think that is very true with Bitcoin, where what I talked about before is a view of technologies as a system, right? And that says that good technologies are things like recipes or instruction manuals. You follow these steps, and you get a predictable outcome at the end. But if we're talking about, say, cooking, you never experimented with the recipe. You're simply following what someone else told you is how you create a pasta, right? And that's a view of technology which I think is the dominant one in our civilization. It's a very dangerous one because it says they basically give away all your freedom, your autonomy, your choice to someone else, and you get this nice consistent outcome at the end with that, in exchange for convenience and predictability, right? Bitcoin is a completely different view of technology in that it's a tool. It's like a guitar, right? You can read an instruction manual about how to play guitar, but you're never going to create great music if you just follow instructions, right? Or you just play someone's covers, right? What it requires is for you to put your humanity into to invest your time and your energy and to understand into it. And what is produced out the end is a reflection of the user of the tool, not something else, right? And that is the nature of the way these things are designed. You could say like an artisan's hammer is the same kind of thing, right? These are tools. They're technologies that are designed for users to have the maximum amount of freedom and autonomy to express themselves through them, and that requires you to sit down and figure out how to play this thing, right? To write its shitty riffs, to fuck up, to do the work. But but what comes out at the end is simply a reflection of what the user does, and it's a very human form of technology, rather than the other one, which is like a very dystopian kind of oppressive technological. It's like machines are controlling people. Really, is what the first one is, right? So Bitcoin is born of a completely different view of technology and those things, and the beauty of it is that it's simply not the first thing in the digital age to have that view, but most people don't care, right? Most people are happy trading their convenience, their privacy, all their information away for this kind of stuff, where this freedom has existed. If you look at, let's say, messaging apps, right? There's plenty of other cool things like, say, Matrix, XMPP, or whatever that exists out there, which are these protocols which most people have never heard of, which allow you to have perfectly private, reasonably perfectly private, secure autonomous communication, but most people just don't care, right? They want to use Facebook Messenger, right? And so most people don't even know about the alternative view of how the world could be through the technologies which control most of our lives, right? And I think Bitcoin is a really important one in that it has the element of greed, right? Most people got into Bitcoin because they want to get rich, right? They don't care about freedom. They care about all this kind of stuff. They just saw an opportunity to make some money, right? And there's this kind of meme of come for the money, stay for the revolution in Bitcoin. And I think that's a very important one, is that this is the one technology out of all of them, which I think shows people of a different way of. A lot of people understand in the world now, particularly say in Russia, where they've been cut off from the traditional financial system since the Ukraine war with, the sanctions and stuff. They can't use the credit cards. They can't transfer money anymore. But here is a way. This one works, and it's complicated. It's convoluted. It's not user friendly, but it works and it's yours. And if you really want to get your head in it, right, you can be fully autonomous in this world, right? And so it's a different view of how technology should serve us and what the whole point of living is, in a sense, right? But I think that is the real value and the real power of it. But it's the fact that it has that financial element, which I think is the magic hook that gets people into the world and gets them to really see it and understand. Without that, it's doubtful, whether this would have ever got anywhere near as big as it is now. So.
It's absolutely fascinating to me, and I guess that, this is something that I always thought about before, just the concept of money in general, because you can look at that as just the evolution of, simple item trading. We used to, read about that in school, how, merchants would trade, and then that trade in itself was something of value, and then when you realize that the entire society and everything that we do is basically revolving around this sort of trade that we have given it our own value. It's a very mind-blowing thing, and then also it does make you think that, wow, shit, this might actually fall apart someday, especially when you're in a position where cost of living is constantly going up. It's becoming increasingly more difficult for people to own things, the deal, by, like, you will own nothing and you will be happy, and then of course on the other side of it you see companies like BlackRock coming in and then, mass purchasing properties in like America, and all these corporations that come and do this, and then they jack up the prices, and then that affects the rents, so it becomes impossible for you to save to eventually be able to buy, and they're just basically, fucking us all up in that way, so and another thing on the other side of that coin, other than the financial aspect of it, which is something that I've had to think a lot about in the last few years. I used to be a lot more naive about this before. You always think that, well, what have you got to hide anyway? So what if the government knows your location? So what if they know what you've spent your money on? So what if they can see your emails or whatever? I used to think like that before. I was like, well, I've got nothing to hide. I'm not a guilty person. You're trying to tell yourself you're a good person or whatever. But it's like, it's not about that, it's the fact that that data that you have is actually valuable to someone else. You might not know what to do with it.
It's a system for control, right? It's exactly like I was saying before about, we are moving to a world where more and more of our day-to-day lives, right? And not just like some fun thing you want to do, like the things that make human beings, right? Their ability to communicate with each other, to cooperate, to express like fundamentally who they are, things that are like deeply important to them, like whatever it is for you that you make money to do, right? These things are all controlled through these bottlenecks of these things here. And as you're saying, a lot of people think, oh, we've got nothing to hide, right? But I think this is the level of extraction of the stuff that we're at, is that you think that, but it's fundamentally untrue. Like, simplest example is, if you're running an insurance company, and I'm able to look at all your messages and you get a picture of your digital life or your life through the digital lens and run that through some sort of AI or something to figure out, to give you a health score, right? Then, the fact that you posted a couple of photos, you're out at the bar yesterday and someone else is just posting health food or something like that. And these same people, let's imagine they're twin brothers, right? Go to this health insurance provider and we'll get two very different prices for the premium, right? And, that is so obvious, right? You can put all the data laws you like in place, you can make it as difficult as, but the money talks, right? And it's inevitable this is where it goes. And this is where happening with things like law enforcement and stuff like that. It's just, you can be more efficient with data and a scale, then you're able to be before. And if you're not more efficient, your competitor will be. And so it's inevitable this is going to happen. And the way that you do that is by collecting as much information on people as possible, and through there. And by surrendering that information, you give them that right for them to decide. And again, it's not the algorithm or the score that they're doing. It's not something that we collectively decided as a society is a reflection of what we want. It's what these guys decide serves them, right? And often it's hidden behind in this black box that you have no view or purview or say into, right? And so for that reason, it's privacy and thinking about these things is fundamentally important. But again, because it's so abstracted away, and because the level of convenience and quality of life that we are given in exchange is so good, most people don't even want to think about this kind of stuff, right? But the other thing that you talked about, the money side of things, right? I think is a very important one as well. And as you're saying, the world existed for thousands of years without money, like barter and things like this, and could easily do again. Money's just the technology, right? It's a way, and really it's a technology for communication, right? It's where do you say I value this particular thing, right? If you have a product which sucks and a product that's great, you communicate that the good one is the one you want by spending your money on it, right? In a very basic level. So that's all that money is. It's just a tool for communication. And the crazy thing is that the world we live in today, that we have no say, no agency, no control over like such a fundamental tool for like human cooperation, communication, integration, right? It's run by governments, it's run by technical corporations and things like that, right? And the beauty of Bitcoin is something where, this is open. Anyone can go and read the code. Anyone can go and change and build on it in a way that suits them. And no one can really stop you from doing that, right? You have to, obviously, if you're trading money, you have to get someone on the other side to want to accept, the Bitcoin or whatever. But this is the beauty of it, right? Is that it is something which is fundamentally ours and offers it's like a crossroads, right? You got that classic Crossroads meme, with like the dark castle and the flowery thing, right? We're at a point like that now, and Bitcoin is certainly not perfect, and there are certainly ways, just as I said, it's open for someone to use how they want to use it. If people want to choose, a technological nightmare, and they want to give away all their information, Bitcoin can easily become a tool for oppression, just like the cell phone, just like the firearm, just like anything else. But it requires like people to use and to understand its potential, right? And I think that's the biggest problem with like what Bitcoin could offer, and what may or may not transpire is it also requires imagination, right? It requires people to realize what potential is here and to envision something different, and to have like willed, intentive use, disciplined use of time towards that outcome, right? So yeah. But I think like the whole thing with Bitcoin, like even if it doesn't succeed or whatever, just simply by the fact that it makes and already has made so many people question like, what is money? Like, does money need to be in this format? Can it be something else? It's already won. It's already won on a massive level, right? The fact that people are thinking about this question and saying, well, hold on, where does this money come from? And money is valuable because it's backed by gold. No, it's not. It hasn't been in pretty much every country for a long time now. So they just print money out there. Why do you pay taxes then? If they can just print money, why do we have to pay taxes if they can just print money to pay? So it's a question about this stuff. And really, we look at it, like people call Bitcoin and things a Ponzi scheme. Yeah, this is the real Ponzi scheme, dude. This is the real one run by a very small select amount of people that we just, people don't even want to have this conversation. They want to think about it because it's so, your world is built on this ridiculous house of cards, but also to like think about how you change that is such a mind shift, right? But it's it is what it is.
The most terrifying thing of them all, and I think this was, I had a bit of an aha moment, I think back in 2015, when I actually realized this, like the whole concept of money, what it really is, and the fact that, like the whole world is built on this thing, and the most terrifying side of it was the horrific shit that we do just to manipulate leverage of this thing that we kind of made up. I think it's absolutely berserk. I mean, like the military industrial complex, that's something that's all about money and leverage, and you think of the side effects of it, how that game translates into the third dimensional world, where so many lives are are at stake, and so many people do get hurt, and then it becomes this crazy thing that's trying to feed itself, and it's a very mind-blowing concept, and it makes our world seem a lot more fragile, actually. But like it's the same as with I don't know if you ever played the Fallout games, but it's like how you got bottle caps. It's the post-apocalyptic world, so you got bottle caps as your currency, and that's how it is, and yeah, there's a lot of very interesting things to unpack there with it. One thing that I kind of want to come back to just a little bit, and I have so many questions just about Bitcoin itself to ask you, but one thing that
Sure.
you pointed to that I really think is worth unpacking is just the value of information. And I definitely think that that's something that's worth paying attention to. Like there's a reason why every website that you go to nowadays, well, since in the last few years that they actually implemented this, it's asking you, oh, do you want to do you accept all cookies? Do you reject them? Do you only accept the essential ones? Blah blah blah. There's all of that, and most people are so oblivious to what that actually means, and the importance of it, and what role it actually plays in our world, and obviously the value of data, because data is essentially the most valuable thing that we have. I mean, you look at fucking TikTok, that's talk about one of the most efficient data mining technologies that there is, and that's TikTok, and that's feeding to China. Speaking of China, by the way, I know a little bit of a tangent here, but I did actually pay attention to this book that you recommended to me, The Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins. I'm yet to read the book, but I've in anticipation of this podcast, I actually listened to a podcast with that guy, and I was utterly fascinated by what he was saying about between China, the relationship between China and Ecuador, basically, you know, where Ecuador are like basically now forever in debt to China because of some of those loans, you know, and the way that they kind of hooked them in. Yeah, it's just fascinating stuff, man. You know, it's pretty eye-opening, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of like money, right? And I'm like, dude, I'm not like an investor dude who has a particular interest in finance. You know, I got interested in finance and know like a little, and but you know, I don't invest in the traditional stock market or anything like that. It's only in Bitcoin, but you know, I understand this world solely because I wanted to buy some drugs, you know, online was how I ended up here, right? So I'm definitely not like an economics guy, but it is like the idea of like how there's this cliche in the Bitcoin world, like fix the money, fix the world. And I think that's like way too broad strokes, but there is quite a significant degree of truth to that, right? It's that like it is such a fundamental part of how the world works is by what money permits and doesn't permit and the way that it works colors so much of the world that we live in, right? And I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about or pay attention to, right? And when it comes to that, it's simply, well, Ecuador could print 1 million. I can't remember the currency's called. It's not pesos. It's some other. Anyway, they could print 1 million of their. No, the US dollar actually. Ecuador uses, right. So Ecuador is not a good example because they have a sovereign currency. But the country that did, right, have their own. Like Argentina is a good example of this, right. You can print a shitload of your own money, but if you're not the United States, well, all you're going to do is just devalue your currency, right. But the United States, and to a much lesser degree, China. Right, you know, like they can denominate their debts in the money that they print themselves, right? So it's like you owe me money, or people owe money to me, and I can just make more of it. Like, how fucked up is that, right? It's the ultimate cheat code, right? And you know, with Bitcoin, the beauty of it is that you know it's limited to 21 million coins ever, and there's no way to cheat or to do this, right? The whole way that more is made is by expending electricity, right? And so this is the whole idea of this proof of work thing. Again, it's like to explain this in proper detail is the whole fucking separate podcast itself.
Well, actually,
but the TLDR.
Yeah, no, I'm super fascinated because this is one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because I just can't wrap my head around the idea of Bitcoin mining. I mean, how does that work? Because someone was telling me that in Iran, I couldn't tell if they were joking or if they were serious, but they were saying that in Iran we keep losing electricity and cities keep going into blackout because they're mining for Bitcoin. And yeah,
very big, and like
thing.
North Korea and Russia and places like that as well, because like for them this is much better money than the US dollar, right? Of course, you know, like for everyone knows, like it fluctuates like crazy, right? You know, like it goes up and down all over the place, and so for a lot of people, Bitcoin is not good money. Like if you're a US citizen with a nice, invest in account and a good checking account, a good bank, right? Bitcoin doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense because your money works, right? But if you live in one of these other countries, your money does not work, right? The financial system does not serve you, right? And so for these people, money that is free and that no one can stop from transferring around is it's a much more appealing proposition, despite all the other, complications that go along with it. But so with Bitcoin mining, how it works is basically to produce more Bitcoins. And this ties into like how transactions are done as well. Okay, so I'll do my best to try and like this again, like this shit can get like super complicated, difficult to explain. So I'm gonna do my best to try and explain this in like
we're here for it, minutes, man. Right? I'm curious.
In simple English. So basically how it works is to every how new Bitcoins are created is that to create a new Bitcoin block, which is like a new imprint on this immutable ledger called the blockchain. Someone has to run software to come up with a hash value, which is of a higher, a specific level of complexity, which is higher than a specific set level, which is automatically set by the algorithm. So basically what that means is you've got to run your computer to like basically just try like imagine like solve Sudoku puzzles, right? Just like random mathematical things to get an answer, right? And imagine that the thing is like you need a Sudoku puzzle with 3 A's on this particular line, right? And that's the criteria. And so you solve a Sudoku, but there's no A's on this line. Okay, throw it out. You solve another Sudoku, solve another Sudoku, solve another Sudoku, right? And eventually you'll get one that has the 3 A's, right? And then that is good enough for the thing to say this is valid, and this person gets to decide what Bitcoin transactions are now imprinted in the ledger. But also that's also how new Bitcoins get released into the system. So for doing that, that person gets rewarded a set amount of Bitcoin. And this reduces every more or less 3 years to like it cuts in half. So it used to be 50 when it started, then it was 25, then it was 12.5, then it was 6. If you give the idea, 6.125, etc. Goes down, and will infinitely reduce basically every 3 years, right? So what that means, and the real significance of that is that you can't just go and print this money out of nowhere. Like this is a system, and it was originally designed as a way to like prevent people spamming you with email. Because back in the 90s, right, and still to this day, like people send out thousands of emails. So this guy thought, okay, maybe if we make a thing where to send an email, a computer has to do like a little bit of mathematical functioning, right? So it's like maybe solving a CAPTCHA, but it's more like energy intensive, right? And so that would prevent like people sending out thousands and thousands of these things, because it would start to cost some energy, and then have to have like a relatively powerful computer to be able to spam people with thousands of emails, right? So that's the whole idea behind Bitcoin, is a way of like, how do you prevent people counterfeiting the money, like just printing thousands of Bitcoin? What you do is you tie it to the real world. You tie it to the expenditure of energy, right? And what that means is that, no one can cheat the system. And most importantly, that the reason I say Sudoku puzzles is that like Sudoku puzzles is like a pointless. There's no way to repurpose that energy, right? People have thought about schemes like this of like Bitcoin waste. People say that Bitcoin wastes energy, right? All these computers are doing these calculations and they serve no purpose, right? Maybe let's like fold proteins so that we can solve cancer. Let's do something with SETI so that we can. But the whole idea behind this, dude, is that there is no way that you can cheat or game the system, because if you did that, then simply the cancer labs would figure out a way to run these machines at a loss and make a shitload of money, right? So the whole idea is that we are all burning money, we are all throwing away stuff, and that no one gets a secret advantage. Like the best advantage you get is cheap energy, right? But beyond that, like no one gets the ability of the US government to just print money out of thin air. You have to like do work to create money, and that creates the basis for the distribution of this money, that no one can cheat the system, right? No one can be like, the special guy gets to print money. You and I are on, an even level about like, if you want to expend more energy than me, then you get more money. If you want to, and this energy not only is it like just, it's not just calculations, but these calculations also secure the network, because to be able to go, anyone could go and change the ledger by producing a different set of like a history with that amount of work to back it up. That's all the software does. It looks at like which one has the greatest amount of like hash value, like the computational power behind the history that they're presented. And so theoretically, you could go back with some super, crazy super thing and like recalculate Bitcoin from zero and present a new one and totally change the history, right? That is totally possible. But, the whole idea behind that is like to do that would require such a fundamental use of energy, and would be at such a high risk of that if you did wrong, you've expended all this energy to try and. So it's those calculations actually secure the network, right? Because the work that's been expended to do this in the first place means for someone else to try and go create a new version of Bitcoin's history from the start, and they could do that, and then that method like counterfeit, the currency, right? To do that would require such a ridiculous expenditure of energy that this is what secures it. So you're not just expending energy to get the Bitcoins that I wouldn't get because I don't expend as you, but you're also securing the network for everyone. You're making it more secure, because for someone else to be able to do what I said, they have to expend more energy than you. And it's not just you, it's hundreds of people thousands of people that are all trying to do the same sort of thing, right? So that's like it's a bit longer than 3 minutes, right? But that's as simple English as I can try and do. Again, this shit is like very complicated, and like that's, kind of glossing over a lot of details, but that's the whole idea behind Bitcoin mining, right? So when you grok this, it's like I said about, it's no surprise to me that nation states are mining Bitcoin, because not only do they want the Bitcoin themselves, but I think this is the real question about what it does, is like, come back to the thing about like Bitcoin wastes energy, right? It's, doing these silly Sudoku puzzles for nothing for this silly internet money system. Well, dude, goes down the middle of fucking Times Square in New York and look at all the fucking screens and lights that are on. Goes down in the fucking dairy where you've got the doors open on a refrigerator with a bunch of Coke sitting in there solely so that people can have like a cool Coke out of thin air. People waste energy all the time. And like, what is a waste of energy is a purely subjective choice, right? The only question is like, are people willing to pay for it? And what is the opportunity cost of that money, right? If you're going to run a Bitcoin miner and you could plug that into, run a factory and make more money with that electricity than the Bitcoin miner, then you would run the factory, right, rather than the Bitcoin miner. All it does is provide a base level for energy, like a base power for base thing, where if nothing else, this energy can be appropriated somewhere else. And this is like super useful when you think about things like there's a lot of energy, like natural energy production, things like say solar or even hydro, where they have the opportunity is there, they can build it. But the question with all this stuff is particularly with like natural gas as well. If the energy is not being consumed, then it's just wasted energy. You can't store it. There's no batteries to store this level of energy, dude. So it's lost into space, right? And so that makes the economics of running these things like very questionable, right? But here is something where you've got the energy is running, and no one, it's 2 a.m. in the morning. Well, it's not a good idea for solar, but gas or hydro or something, right? 2 a.m. in the morning, no one is using the energy. It's being generated. You can just like in natural gas, they just burn it, dude. They just flare it off. They burn it, right? But here's something where, okay, we can plug it into this and get something for that energy, right? Get some amount of money for it that allows these things to be economical and viable, right? So there's a whole economics of this kind of stuff as well, where you provide like a base value for energy, which I think fundamentally transforms like our economy and the way we view things, but also like as a base layer for like infrastructure investment and growing things. There's a whole level to that, and this is already happening in a lot of places in the world where like people are realizing here is something where if you have energy, rather than just like throwing it away, here's something that can give us at least a baseline thing for it. So yeah, it's my work.
That's very interesting. I'm very intrigued by the idea of the way that you explain it, where you say that you can't cheat your way into mining it, because I think if you did, then the whole thing would just, I guess, fall apart. I guess it would be the way I envisioned it in my head is, if we went to if we went to mine an asteroid that was filled with diamonds, by the time we come back, that just devalues diamonds, period. That's kind of the way I'm digesting this information.
Well, I mean, and this is it, right? Because if you look at like monies themselves, like the whole idea about like what makes monies good monies is an interesting question, right? I mean, this is why gold has been the money over so many disparate to the conclusion that this is the best money, right? Qualities, it has to be regions that had glass beads as money. A lot of civilizations have used glass beads as money, right? Because they had these kind of properties for them. But then like the English come to these things, and they're like, these guys use glass beads as money. Okay, let's go home, make a ship full of glass beads, and come back and and use it to buy everything in the country, right? And this has happened over many civilizations and many iterations. Like, people use seashells, feathers, things like this as money, but they all decided that gold was the best money because of the properties that it had. Like, it's very durable, it's very hard to get, it's very rare, it's very recognizable, and this kind of stuff. And so if you look at
also the theory. Sorry to interrupt you, but there's also the theory that the Anunnaki actually programmed humans to mine for gold because they needed gold to save the atmosphere of their planet that they came from.
Well, maybe Bitcoin is like, some people say, man, it's like created by some alien. So it's an interesting story, like the creation story as well. But if you look objectively, like there is objectively better monies and worse monies, like, no question, right? And Bitcoin is, if you look at it, really the best money that has ever been created and could be created, because just simply the laws of physics mean that it is like more. It's impossible for someone to counterfeit. It's impossible for someone to fake. It can be transported across time and space almost instantly. For all these things, it is just objectively better money, right? Now, objectively better things don't always become, the winning solution, but I think that's like beyond question, as it is objectively the better money, right? And so that's part of like why it is, not only why it is good, but also why. Again, if you look at it as far as fix the money, fix the world, that whole meme, it creates a better world, in that, like, people can't cheat the system, and that everyone is on the same playing field. And that if you think about what that means for the future of the world, where, for example, the United States can't print billions of dollars to finance wars in thousands of other countries and pay off people like you read about or will read about in Economic Hitman, this fundamentally changes the playing field of the world, I think, for the better. Like, in the short term, maybe it's going to be somewhat of a chaotic transition. But you think about that world, that's what we all want, right? Is an even playing field and an even system of measurement and balance, right? For everyone to exist on. And when the world doesn't have that, that's when bad shit happens, right? And a desirable world is where we all have an equal footing and an equal point of measure that people can't change or manipulate, fuck around with.
Very, very interesting, and I guess that dynamic at least plays a lot into the whole nuclear power ordeal as well. And not nuclear power as such, but nuclear weapons, like enriched uranium in particular, is that, I guess that kind of comes down to having that level playing field. The thing with just coming back to Bitcoin in general, the thing that I think a lot of people feel apprehension about, with cryptocurrencies, I think a lot of people are afraid of being scammed, and I'll be honest, I'm one of those people. I wouldn't say afraid, but then there's always this thing of like, well, here's something that I don't really know about, especially when you got so many different ones, where you've got Dogecoin and then you've got all this other stuff, and then you've got, I think, the perfect example of all the shit that went down with FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried, and I'm sure you're probably already more than familiar with that whole fucking ordeal, where it becomes this giant thing, it becomes mainstream, they got their own fucking arena, FTX arena, and then all this stuff comes out, and then it's like a giant fucking shit show. Although very interesting to note that they were the second highest donors to the Democratic Party in America as well, but that's a different pathway to go down. So how do we deal with the distrust of such a thing? Because it seems like a very complex technology, and it seems like not just something that you can do on the offhand of like, oh, let me just go invest a little bit. And then, it doesn't sound like to me something you can do part-time. Is the impression I'm getting.
Yeah, I mean, well, probably the most important distinction to make here is, there's Bitcoin and then there's everything else, right? So Bitcoin was created by no one knows who. Yeah, a guy's called Satoshi. To this day, quite an amazing feat that like no one really knows who that person is, and they just disappeared. And you can see, you can't tell exactly how much that dude had, but there's some which, at the start is obviously his, that hasn't moved since the day it landed, right? And this guy is sitting on, by conservative estimates, something to the tune of like hundreds of billions of dollars of Bitcoin, and hasn't spent a cent of it, right? So it's credited by this guy who did that and then disappeared, and now has nothing to do with the project. And it's not in control of it, and no one really is in control of Bitcoin. Like the best way, I think, to explain how Bitcoin works that I've ever seen is, that scene from Reservoir Dogs, it's kind of like a meme as well, where they're all like in a circle with the Mexican standoff, where they're all pointing a gun at each other, right? That is how Bitcoin works, right? Is that no one is actually in control of it. It's like this kind of chaotic point of kind of consensus, if you like, where all these things reach equilibrium, right? So I mean, there's Bitcoin, but everything else has been created by someone else. Like even something like, the second biggest one, Ethereum, that was created by a bunch of visible people. A lot of like the infrastructure of how it works and how it's funded is by, a particular set company. They have often, changed the monetary policy, some like fundamental parts of it. And then pretty much every other cryptocurrency fits into this particular thing. So my first statement about that would be just buy Bitcoin and don't buy anything else. It's entirely possible that some other thing will go up more in the short term, or possibly even long term, who knows, but you can be sure if this thing is around and it's going to be a thing. And I think to me, it's unquestionable at this point that Bitcoin is going to appreciate massively from where it is now. So what you're after is like money, and financial, appreciation, then I think it's the most obvious bet, right? Where it's likely to go versus where it is now versus the surety of that happening is the best trade of all. Everything else is a lot more questionable and a lot more, hey, if you really want to go down that road and you look into it and make your own choices, go at it. And I think this is all about freedom and about individual choice. And so, despite whatever I might believe, I think people should do that themselves. But here is the thing of, like I talked about before, about systems and tools. You can't have your cake and eat it, man. You can't have this, and this is what people expect, right? Their world and their vision of finance and just technology in general is they want things to be handed to them on a silver platter, someone that they can trust for an answer. And if they trust this person, that there's some sort of comeuppance, or there's some sort of they can get some what's what I look for. They can sort it out, right? If someone lied to them or something. And this is the world's where this is moving to. If you don't want any one person in control, that also means, to a degree, like anarchy of like self-responsibility. I think that's what it really comes down to, right? And pretty much everyone I know who's been wrecked in like the crypto world, right, the guy's thing, is that they just bought shit that they didn't fucking understand, that they never took the time to read about, right? Because it was going up in price, and the short term that maybe they won, but the reason they lost money is because they fucking thought they could swim with the sharks without doing the homework, right? So my advice about all that is like avoid the trading stuff of like buying all these millions of like shit coins of Joe Biden or all these whatever the fancy one is at the moment, right? And just buy Bitcoin and don't like throw all your fucking money in it at once. Like if you're like me and you really understand it and you spend time, then sure, go at it. But if you're new to it, like, match your understanding with your investment and what you're doing. Never invest in something that you don't understand. The best way, man, is simply take some amount of money that you would spend a week, a month, a day, and make a decision, right? So let's say, for example, every other week you might go out to the movies, right, with your girlfriend, and then you go out for a few drinks at the bar afterwards, right? So, let's just say, for example, that's $150, right? Stay in, watch a movie, spend $150 in Bitcoin, right? And in the future, if it doesn't work out, what have you lost? Not much, like some cool nights out watching a movie and having some drinks, but not that much, same net outcome, that money's gone, and if it works, well, I think you've made what, in my opinion, is clearly like the best investment that you could possibly make in your life, right? So that's the way I think that people should approach it, right? And where everyone goes wrong is they just get greedy, right? And when things are on the way up, as it looks like they kind of are now, it's pretty easy for people to fall into that way of thinking and to do it, and you will be winning over and over, but then you'll be losing because you're deluded at this point to think of something where there's so much money and so many smart people with so much more information and technology and stuff around you, and there's so little regulation that you're not going to get fucked. But you're not a genius, even though you might feel like a genius, right? You are going to, you're going to get rich. So the best way is simply to buy. Don't look at the price and think about this as a 5 or 10-year investment, right? Just park it away, save it in like in a hardware wallet. Learn how to custody your own Bitcoin. And then just park it there and think about something you don't look. It's like a savings account, right? And don't put a crazy amount of money. Just put a small amount of money there. And if everything I'm saying is right, or something along the lines of what I'm saying is right, it'll be the best investment you've ever made in your life, even if it's only $50 a week or something like that. So yeah, I think that's a simple one. It's just a lot of people go from 0 to 1,000 miles an hour way too quickly and way out of the thing, when really they should just keep it simple, keep it well framed. And again, if you look at all the bigger picture of the stuff I've talked about here, this is obviously, that is something where even, a few $100,000 is going to be a big payday if you're patient and you don't make stupid decisions and get greedy.
The question then becomes, first and foremost, I totally understand the dynamic you're talking about when, that when something is on the up and then everyone gets overly confident and then they go and do too much. And then when it crashes, they start crying. I actually am more than familiar with that because I spent a good few years working at a casino, so I've seen it all.
That's exactly what a lot of these exchanges are, these casinos. Totally.
Yeah, exactly. There's a random fact about me there that probably no one knew. But the question becomes, how can you spend it?
Right. So, I mean, at the moment, there's not a hell of a lot. There definitely is. If you go out there and look around to find it, there are plenty of places you can spend Bitcoin or other things on stuff, right? Probably and this is, I mean, you would definitely, it's definitely a valid criticism, right? That it's difficult to spend, and it is, I think, also clumsy to spend, in that, I think credit cards and things like that are generally a hell of a lot more convenient and a hell of a lot easier, certainly as far as just finding a place that will take your money, but the whole process of sending them, there are other technologies and things like this in space which, will do your transaction faster than a credit card, that are simpler and don't require you to fucking put in your address, the numbers of your credit card every time you do it. You just scan the QR code, boom, done. So there are, I think there are better payments in that sense. But I think broadly speaking, from the perspective of most, your average guy, I mean, it's definitely a shittier experience than traditional money, right? So the best way to if you're talking about spending them, the question when I'm saying that would be that, if this is bootstrapping a new money, right? If this is going to be something where I believe, to the degree this happens and what this looks like, I think it's quite questionable. But I think it's a very broad thing that at some point in the future, and this could be 50 years, 100 years, could be 10 years, who knows, the world arrives to the conclusion, everyone sees the thing of this is just better money. I want to be paid in Bitcoin, not in dollars, right? So I think that world can quite likely come, or something more like that world can come, but it is not happening tomorrow and it's not here now, right? And so for that sense, I think you're probably better to think about it as a savings vehicle rather than a spending vehicle at first. So that's, I think, a caveat before, about spending it is something that should be said, right? It is maybe you want to view it as spend your shitty money and save the good money, as a way, to view about how you view this thing. Now, that being said, of course, if you can't spend the money, what is the point of it, right? If it's if you've got a whole shitload of gold coins, but no one wants to take your gold coins, what is the use of the gold coins? It might be a bit of money, but whatever. So there are.
Yeah, I was gonna make that comparison actually. If Grandpa's got a treasure chest in the backyard buried, that that might be worth something, but you might not necessarily be able to take a chain or a necklace out of that and then go give it to the shop in exchange for a sandwich. I mean, you might. I guess well, I mean, it depends on the shop.
Maybe the obvious one in front of. The obvious one in front of our face, that should be said, is just, of course, obviously you could just sell it for $4 and use those dollars to buy things, right? So there's that to be said. But beyond that, there are plenty of places that you can spend. If you look around, if you just Google, where can I spend Bitcoin, or businesses accept Bitcoin locally, there's quite a few websites that will promote this kind of stuff, and you'll find like there are quite a lot of restaurants, bars, telecoms, and things like that will accept Bitcoin. Sometimes it's like a painful experience, of like like I've had things where like they're very savvy with it, and they'll yeah, sure, and they'll bring up thing and just pay like that. There's other ones are like, oh shit, I've got to get Jim out the back and get him to, and it can be like a painful experience. So, that is something that you can come across. But the easiest one, the one that I use a lot nowadays, is a service called Bitrefill. And that's a website, a company which sells gift card for Bitcoin. So
what is it
for
called
example,
again?
Bitrefill.
Okay.
All one word. Yeah. And so that they sell, it depends on like the country that you're in. Like in some countries, it's a lot better than others. The United States, England, Europe, and things like that, it's great. And some smaller ones, like say in New Zealand, the selection we can get is a lot less. But for example, where I'm here in Mexico, right, and I travel a lot, and I also have phones in like 4 or 5 other countries, right? Because I'm like a resident in other countries, and I travel around, and I like to have a SIM card and come to these kind of places, right?
You told me about this. I was very interested by this.
Yeah. It's a real pain in the ass to top up my Paraguayan phone number with, I actually don't have a Paraguayan bank account at the moment. And like to be able to top that up, even via credit card can be very painful, because, a lot of the times if you're in a different country and you try and top up something, you try and make a credit card payment to one of these like less privileged countries from somewhere else, immediately it's fraud, right? It gets blocked, and your card might even get blocked, right? But I mean, this is one of the beauty of things like Bitcoin, and also especially when linked with gift cards, is that it's not an issue, right? Because there's no chargebacks, which is why credit cards have these issues, right? Is someone steals the credit card, they call up the bank, and the bank they say, hey, someone stole my credit card, and the bank's in a situation where generally they have to refund the customer's money if they can prove that this is true. But because like Bitcoin is like cash, it's not like a credit card is what's the word I'm looking for? It's like a debt-based instrument, right? Where it's not actually giving them some money, it's a promise to someone else, right? With Bitcoin, if you have the Bitcoin, you have the Bitcoin, and that's it. No one can take it from you, no one can remove it from you, right? So it's as good as someone handing you cash, right? There's no risk of someone coming back 2 weeks later and saying, oh, actually, that you got to give that, because it's going to pull that out of your account, right? So it's great in that sense of like as a way to like to be able to pay and top up things with internationally, and I use a lot like that. But also like, so for example, here in Mexico, I've replaced pretty much everything I have with gift cards from Amazon that I bought directly with Bitcoin. And I find it like a shitload easier than a credit card of having to put in your details, your address, all this kind of stuff, deal with payment things. Also, with the risk of like credit card fraud and all that kind of stuff, like simply being able to pay up and top up instantly like that is a really, really handy one. So Bitrefill is one of the better ones, I think, to find. Another one that you'll see a lot now is there are ways, where for example, okay, so Bitcoin fees, right? So to send a Bitcoin transaction, the whole way that it works and the system kind of works beyond the mining thing is that you pay a fee to be able to send it, right? And the way it used to be like pretty much zero, but the economics of the system is that nowadays it's, minimum something like 20 cents. And like if you get, because it's purely like no one's in control of it or banish it out. It's pure like a supply demand kind of thing. Like you can get like on the odd occasion for a small window of time, like a few hours, it's like $50 to send a Bitcoin or other kind of things, cryptocurrency transactions. Now, it's not a permanent thing, but it can be in that situation, right? Now, there in a situation like that, it doesn't make sense if you like, for example, buy a coffee for $2. If it happened to be at that particular time, it was like $20 for a transaction, right? Now there's ways to mitigate that, but the point that I'm making behind all that is that I think probably, especially at this point in time, that seeing this as a way to buy small items is maybe not the right way to view it. I think probably one of the best ways to do this, and this is becoming a lot more common, not so much in like Western countries, but like definitely outside of them, as a way to buy property or like cars or like high value items like that. Because even if there is, it is a slightly more costly transaction, it might be, $1 versus say 5 cents or something. To send it.
Nuclear bunkers.
It's a good way. It's a good way to move, that's like that. But it's a good way to move money and to pay for high ticket items. And it's especially like if you're buying foreign property, right? Moving money from one country to another can be like a thing where you get a lot of paperwork and it's a painful process and stuff. Whereas Bitcoin is just done, and there's nothing to stop it, right? It will be there instantly, right?
One thing.
So that's another good one to look at is like high ticket items. You'll find more and more people. There's a market, but also you'll find people are more open and sometimes even give you a discount for Bitcoin for those kind of things.
Right. Okay. There's one thing that I didn't quite understand though. So it's that, for example, let's say that it is $20 per transaction. Who's getting that $20? I mean, where's that money going?
The miners are.
Right.
So how Bitcoin works is this. It's like every time I talked about way back that what these guys do is they are processing what's called a block, which is like a set amount of data which gets imprinted on the blockchain, which is the record of like all the blockchain is like a ledger of like this person paid this person this amount of money, and through that ledger, like any ledger, you can figure out what people's balances are, right? And so what incentivizes the miners to do that is the reward, like I talked about, that automatically, they get a diminishing amount, started at 50, went down to 25, etc. Every 3 years it goes down. They get that set amount of reward for solving the Sudoku problem and printing that, and therefore getting the right to put this in the Bitcoin ledger. And so there's that, but the other one is fees. So because there's only a set amount of data that can be done per block, that means that there is a bidding system in place, right? Where if you really, really want to get yours in, you might pay a bit more money to make sure that it happens as soon as possible. Whereas if you're not in a hurry, if you can wait 2 weeks or something, it's, you say you're moving money from one account to the other account. You don't mind if it's like going to take a month. You could pay almost nothing, right? And you could wait that amount of time. And so it's like a supply and demand system to do that, which is a way that means that like when eventually this thing will half and half and half forever, and eventually it'll be almost nothing, right? So this is the way that this system can continue in perpetuity, is people paying fees for it. But the biggest one is, and this is a bit of the game theory behind like why Bitcoin is so amazing and why also paying fees is important. Where some people say, because there's a million of these things around, right? And people will say, oh, why don't I use this one, which is like free, almost free, 1 cent, when a Bitcoin transaction is 20 cents or 50 cents, or, again, and on the odd occasion can get some ridiculously high thing because of just like network congestion is really what that is, right? And the reason is this, is that like, if it costs nothing to send a transaction, then it's the same thing about this whole idea about proof of work that I talked about before with like spam emails. If it costs nothing for someone to send transactions, people can just like DDoS, they can flood the network with a whole bunch of garbage, and they can send these things through. But it also means that if there's no incentive for someone to process your transaction financially, then there is no reason for them to do it. And so the whole reason that fees exist is that these mining farms, right? Where mining happening, it used to be like you were just running it on your laptop. Now these are like massive industrial, like, kilometers long, full of hundreds and thousands of these machines designed to do one specific thing and only capable of doing one thing. And that's like doing these hash functions to solve Bitcoin things. It's a humongous industry, right? So what inevitably is going to happen in the future, like you talked about with Iran, is like governments will run these things and they will privatize them. This already happens in Venezuela. There's a lot of people in Venezuela where obviously Bitcoin makes a hell of a lot of sense in a country like that where there's massive inflation, but also moving money and getting access to money is very difficult, right? But if they can get one of these machines in, they can snuggle one in, they can figure out how to do it. There's almost free electricity in Venezuela because it's subsidized by the state. There's a shitload of like covert, where people... you see this even like in Western countries where it's not illegal, where there's like the cops will bust into this place because there's like a massive amount of energy being used and there's heat, and they think it's like a grow op, but it's actually just like a Bitcoin mine, right?
Right.
And so there's a lot of these kind of clandestine operations in a lot of countries doing this to be able to get Bitcoin, right? So anyway, so the world that we are moving towards, that I think sometime in the future will happen, is that governments will say, well, hey, this thing takes away the money printer from us, and it is a way, where people can get around capital controls, and we want this as well. We want to control this stuff. We want to make the money. We've got access to almost free energy, so we want to privatize or nationalize all this stuff, right? So in that world, it's easy for them to go to the miners and say, okay, guys, you're the guys who decides which transactions get processed and which don't. These are the ones that we'll let you do, and anything outside of this is illegal, right? So in that world, it's pretty easy for Bitcoin, this amazing system we're talking about, to get captured and controlled by governments, right? And the answer to that is fees. Because let's just say, we'll take the biggest, most obvious example. Iran wants to pay North Korea, right? And obviously they're not going to let that transaction go through, right? But if you are able to run one of these miners, even if it's a tiny, tiny one, and you're running one of these, and then basically, if you were doing that, the chance for you to solve the block and be the guy that decides the transaction is like winning the lottery, or even less, right? But if they are moving like $6 million between each other, that would happily pay $20,000, $30,000, $100,000, $1 million for that transaction to go through. There's no other way, right? There's no other way for them to move the money, right? And so what that means is there's like $1 million sitting on the table for that one person who's running that one miner secretly in their room, trying to win that lottery, where if they got it, they get that $1 million, right? So this is all like, it's cool. So I mean, this is
Zoom agrees with you.
Yeah, this is like fundamental to the economic incentives of what makes Bitcoin censorship resistant, is that these fees is what ensures that it doesn't get captured by some massive thing that controls all the mining, because anyone can run a miner, anyone can do the stuff, and if you're willing to pay a big enough fee, that incentivizes them to process this transaction. They might have all this risk or other complications involved with it, but when that money is sitting on the table, money talks, and that's kind of what the whole system is based on. Is that kind of thing there. So there is a reason for fees, and there is a reason that this works. And if you don't understand that, right, like Bitcoin really is a ridiculous, stupid way to do money, and that like you've got everyone who runs a Bitcoin node has like the entire history of all transactions on their computer, and every time I pay you, everyone in the world hears about it, and everyone in the world stores it, right? Like, what a ridiculous system, right? They don't need to know about you paying me paying you. It doesn't affect them, right? But the whole it doesn't make any sense. But the only reason that this does make sense, right, is because of censorship resistance. Because it's money that no one can not only prevent being sent, but also can prevent being forged and being changed, right? And so there's a lot of stuff like Bitcoin where the fact that, you pay fees, and fees might get to this ridiculous thing, seems nonsensical, right? And you're like, why the fuck would anyone use this Bitcoin stuff? Why would you just not use credit cards, right? And if you view it in the lens of like the everyday person, in a Western country, then of course it doesn't fucking make sense, right? It's a ridiculously convoluted system to be able to do something that you could easily trust a bank to do, right? Or trust a credit card company. They don't need to know about this. I just tell the credit card company about, I want to pay you, and they take care of this. But what does that mean? That means the credit card company gets to decide whether you or I do not, and they know everything about it, right? So it's fundamental to the system to make it work, and it's one of these many things with Bitcoin where, man, it is not the perfect money versus the traditional system in many ways. But it is your money, and it is money that no one else can fidget with or can do with. And these are simply the prices of creating a system which fulfills that criteria, right? Because you've got to give up convenience. It gets convoluted and annoying, but you can't have your cake and eat it, man. And this is the way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating, man. I think so. To perhaps summarize that dynamic in maybe perhaps more of a philosophical example, or hypothetically at least, I think you can say that, let's say, if your bank is basically like one football stadium where you get to go in there and play football, but your time is limited, you have to abide by a set of rules, you have to do certain things in the locker rooms, you can, and you have to abide by these rules. You get to play football, but you have to do it the way that they say you do it. Now, Bitcoin seems to me that you and a bunch of friends come and start playing football in the alleyway outside the stadium, and you set your own rules
Exactly.
for it.
Exactly. Bitcoin is punk rock money. It's the best way to view it, I think, right?
I like it.
It's and that it's such an important thing to, I think it's a great analogy that you just used, because I mean that is like, return to what I was talking about technology before. The world that we move is one where people want to create these stadiums, and these beautiful stadiums with all the cool features and nice showers and all this kind of stuff. But they're just trying to trick you and lock you into this thing where people don't even know how like create their own soccer stadium, right? They've forgotten. I think you can't. Like, they're just so locked in the world, and a lot of the Western world is already like this now, where they're like, the idea of being able to do this out there, like, but you can't do that. It's wrong, or it's, they didn't know why, right? And the whole idea behind Bitcoin is that it's like a bottom up kind of thing, right? Another great analogy I like to use with this is like, like Bitcoin was not created to like every other business or anything else that we know with money, to like exploit like a financial opportunity or to generate profit, right? It was just some dude or a bunch of dudes. If you look at like the history of what informed Bitcoin to be able to be, the guy who built it on the shoulders of giants, right? There were many technological innovations, people tried to do this, but they just didn't work. They didn't figure out this part or that part, right? And he built on the shoulders of what people had done before. But the whole idea behind this is like, it wasn't people trying to get rich. It was people trying to do something that was meaningful and allowed them to communicate and share with other people. And I think a good analogy is like, say, rock music itself, right? Or say metal or any other genre, right? Like, who owns rock music? Does anyone own rock music? Does anyone? No, like no one does. It's everyone's possession, right? And what
Gene
has happened with
Siemens
many
likes to
genres?
think that he does, but I don't think he actually owns it.
He's not a bad candidate, dude. I think,
Yeah.
like Gene Simmons tries to say, is this what rock music is? And people say, no, fuck you, it's not. And they go and do it. No, he can't stop them. He doesn't own what rock music is, right? Rock music is everyone's creation, everyone's thing. And if you look at like money, like if you talk about like traditional fiat money, like the pound in England, the Bank of England says, this is your money, and we control what this is, and it is this, and it is not this, and that is the fucking end of the story. And you have no say on. You can vote, you can try and elect some guy who thinks going to change that, but good fucking luck, right? Good luck with him, even if he's the most radical candidate. Good luck with him actually fighting against that Leviathan and winning, right? But the beauty of Bitcoin is like, if you have a different idea, you can just fucking open your computer and code it and do it yourself, right? Or you and a bunch of your buddies can come up with a good idea. And many such things have been done in Bitcoin, where people have a vision of how this could be, or you can build on it and they can go and create it, right? And to me, that's such a fundamental shift about like what money is a technology, and money serves all these purposes in our society, and is so fundamental to coloring the world we live in today. That is so much better a world, and so much more a world that we want to live in, where if you and I, the options presented to us, what's in front of us, are shit, we're not just stuck with that. Like many other people, like, you would certainly know where you've come from. And a lot of the world is where their options are just what they have, and there's nothing they can fucking do about it, right? They have no agency, they have no ability to change the world they live in. And Bitcoin, you and I can get together and we can change that world, and no one can stop us from doing that, right? The only real thing is it a good idea or is it a shit idea? And if it's a shit idea, it doesn't catch on, you can't stop us creating it, but it's not really going to catch on, right? But if we have something that works and makes sense for a lot of people, we can just go and do it. We don't need anyone's permission. We don't need a license. We don't need to, fit it to this thing or get like funding from ZC. You can just like crack out a computer and make it, dude. And if you think about what the implications of that are for the worlds beyond Bitcoin, if people like understand that and start to brew that into all sorts of things, it's a very transformative, powerful idea. And I think that's the most powerful thing about it.
Absolutely. And I can see that, I think I have a much better understanding of that now than I did prior to us having this conversation. I think the thing that perhaps is worth paying attention to, and I don't know how many people think about this, if it's just me or, but I think people do think about this actually. There's just not something that is often spoken about out loud, but it's the idea that, shit could just hit the fan and you could find yourself in a situation, I mean, you talk about a situation where the power grid goes out. How long does that take before everything is completely fucked? Where every father of every family realizes that, oh yeah, if I don't find food for my kids in the next 16 hours or however long, then they're fucked and I'm fucked, and I'm not going to let that happen. And then all of a sudden there's no power, so there's no refrigeration. And then it's like, okay, now I need to find food. Oh, it's just people. And then people start eating each other. It's not that, I know it sounds this crazy thing. That literally could happen anywhere in the world. That could happen in the West. It wouldn't even take that much for that to happen, actually. So no one wants to talk about that, but it's all it would take is for the power grid to come out, because we've always been pushing so hard in evolving with technology and with power and all these things, and now we are actually at a point where we are so dependent on it, where I mean, you see it now, like if like Facebook or Meta or Instagram has a glitch for 30 seconds, there's like articles about it on every major news place, and that's just the way that's the way it goes. And now imagine the power grid, that everyone operates their refrigerators and everything they've got off of it, all the supermarkets, all the stocks, all the what do you call them, the control towers for airports, all the train stations, all of that just goes out for, I don't know, let's call it 6 hours even. That's not long, is it? That in itself, the catastrophe that would come from it would be life-changing for like everyone. Every human that lives on the planet would have their lives changed by just those 6 hours. Again, we don't want to think about that. We don't realize how fragile the world that we live in is, but that's the way it goes. So I suppose, now again, I don't know how in that electric and energy derived fashion, perhaps that might not even actually be the most compatible thing with Bitcoin, but what from a philosophical perspective, or rather maybe more practical perspective, when you are in that situation where shit falls apart, no one cares about how much money you got in your bank anymore. They want that other thing that's their leverage. You know what I mean? People, when you're in a situation like that, no one cares about how much money you got now, or let's say when you're in a situation when there's a certain drug that everyone in the world gets used to, or let's say, should we say an injection that people receive every 6 months, and they've been having it for so long that they need that for their immune system to actually survive. And then all of a sudden there's a stock shortage on that. Money goes out the fucking window. You need other ways of being able to trade and to survive. Me really sat here thinking like a real true capitalist right now. All right, but I think that's where it is. But what I want to ask you, and this is, I'm fucking loving this, by the way. But what a fantastic conversation. But just from a more philosophical perspective and point of view, and please, this is very open-ended, so feel free to go wherever you want to go with it. When you're talking about this whole concept, and one thing that you keep coming back to and saying that it's not about the financial gain, but rather about the freedom and owning what it is that you're doing, why is that important to begin with? Why is it important to have that freedom?
Because I think the as you're saying, like the picture you painted about collapse of society speaks to like how dependent we are on technology, on our tools, right? And either a man has agency over his tools, or those tools decide and color fundamentally who he is and what he's capable of, right? And so I think the world that you're describing falling apart is a different thing, right? And that world, the world that we know today, falls apart, and I think it falls apart quite quickly in the sense that, like, as you're saying, without electricity, everything. Forget about Bitcoin, so much other stuff, like just keeping your food cool enough for you to be able to know where you're going to eat tomorrow, right? Is out the window, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, it speaks to, I think, to our level of reliance on technologies and how much of our life in the world today is decided by these things, right? The world you described is a pretty brutal and bleak one. And as you were saying, is a lot closer than it perhaps would have been 2,000 years ago, right? There isn't really many things that could have, maybe like the sun getting blotted out or something. There's not many things that could happen like this that could, fundamentally change our reality in the way that, losing the power, even the internet nowadays, would have a somewhat of a similar effect, right?
And if I may
so
just elaborate on that for a quick second, I hate to break your flow, but just I really want people to imagine this, that how close we are to that happening at any moment. Think of it like this. Those people that I talk about, let's say they go hungry and then they've got no food. What's their first instinct? Well, where can I get food from? Okay, you've raided the supermarkets, you're out of supermarkets. When's the next place you go to? People's houses. You think you if you live in an apartment block, you're fucked. People could easily come and break in, just going into different houses, raiding everywhere, especially those who already have weapons, So if you live in America and you don't already have weapons, good luck. And the same happens even if you're a farmer and you've got a decent bit of land. If you're not secure, people are going to start raiding your place because they're going to be like, oh yeah, I wonder that if that's the person who's keeping some supplies. Have they got supplies that we could go eat? Maybe we can go have something there. And then people start attacking, and then it becomes this insane, chaotic warfare, the real age of Kali Yuga. I actually think we're very close to it, by the way. I actually think, it sounds like this crazy dystopian thing, but I actually think that we're on our way to that, and my girlfriend fucking hates me talking about it, but it's coming, it's coming. That's gonna happen, it's the return of Jesus. Hallelujah.
I mean, I think that already has happened and will continue to happen in many countries. Like if you just say, look at certain parts of Ukraine, in the last 2 years, they had a taste of that, like perhaps temporary or whatever. And I think really, if you look at this, it would have to be a very dramatic thing for this to be permanent as well, in terms of people will find a way to generate electricity. People will, reconnect. There's so much incentives for people to continue with what exists that for things to devolve into total anarchy, dark ages would require something very extreme taking place, right, for that to happen. So I think that is a perpetual state over an extended period is it just doesn't really make sense outside of act of God kind of things, right? But short term, yes, and I think perhaps is what is more of a realistic way to speak to what you talked about is people that dangle this little carrot or this little thing in front of you, well, things could go a little bit more in that way, right? You could lose these fundamental freedoms, or not freedoms, but I think privileges or things that you think you have if they get taken away from you, right? Or a common one from where I have kind of shaped my life towards that a lot of people say is well, if you go live in some shitty country like Paraguay or something like that, and the power goes out every once in a while, or you don't have access to these conveniences, oh, it's so difficult, oh, I can't, oh, blah, blah, blah. But, what prompted me to do that myself was, I was already on this, but certainly during COVID, accelerated that. You can just see how quickly something like that, and, regardless of what your thoughts of COVID were about that whole thing, I think the cat is very obviously out of the bag now. If you tried to tell people in January 2020 that the government would be able to stop you from going out to bars, or get everyone to wear a mask, or do all these kind of things, you would have laughed. You would have laughed. You would have said absolutely impossible. And so they would have thought it was impossible. But now you can see how easy it is to do those kind of things. And sure as hell, people are going to make use of those powers, and they're going to, they've seen that what is possible, and they've seen how it is done, and that is going to happen again in some way, shape, or form. Exactly how extreme or what format, I don't know, but that power that they have, which they didn't thought they had before, is now, the emperor has no clothes, right? Everyone knows about that, right? And so I think perhaps to me, to come back to what you're saying, is a lot of people organize their lives Let's just talk about the firearms one as an example, right? Like, and some people are in a country where they had the privilege of being able to purchase one. A lot of people don't understand like why Americans are so fucking gun crazy and stuff. And okay, from someone that has a lot of experience with firearms and has owned a lot of firearms, I think he has. So to me, it seems a little crazy. But the logic behind it, I think, is sound in the sense of like, if you don't have a gun and you're in that world, your decisions and the way you act change very quickly, and it doesn't have to end up in that world. It just has to be the possibility or the slight likelihood that might take place for that things to fundamentally affect your decision-making process, and for you to not do things that maybe you would do otherwise if you had that confidence of your own self-sovereignty, if you like what I'm saying. So I think that's
one example that I always make about that, and I think most people who listen to the podcast regularly know my views about this already, but I always make the example of the following, and it's that if the people of Iran, let's say hypothetically speaking, if Iranians had access to the Second Amendment back in September 2022, when those riots kicked out, I reckon that the mullahs would have been overthrown and out within 3 or 4 weeks of that. All it would have taken was just for the civilians to have access to that, because that's a part of it as well. It's not just about having guns to defend yourself, or like go to war. No, a big part of it is to defend yourself against tyranny, and tyranny can be your own government, and that's why I actually love the idea of the Constitution. I've said it on here many times before, but yeah, it's definitely food for thought, because ultimately it becomes a game of leverage. The less leverage that you have over your government, whether it's in ways of force, like let's say with firearms, or whether it's financial, or like you're now making the case for Bitcoin, the lesser of that you have, the more easy it becomes for your government to impose their own rules on you and have you become essentially batteries to a system that they created, that they run. And you gotta remember that they're just people like you and I. And
yeah. I was thinking this as you were saying that, as well as, firearms are like a very obvious, clear example, right? But what the reality is it's far more pervasive than that, right? It's things like, if you were cut off from your bank, if you were cut off from Facebook, how would you go about doing these kind of things? Like I had the experience, right? Okay, here's a good one. An experience where I was in Panama and called an Uber to a place, and then went to call him back, and it's just like, you got to contact support. And so I ended up walking like 30 minutes at like 11 p.m. through some kind of sketchy areas, right, to get back. And then they asked, like, I had to do it. I had to put in my email. And what had happened is, like, I'd had an account when I was living in New Zealand, and I didn't use Uber for like 2 years ago. I was in Indonesia and Mexico and places where I was living in Mexico and Indonesia, there's no use, right? And I'm like, shit, I don't remember my password. I don't remember the email I've got access to on my phone. But that was using a particular email that was a convenient one for me to have, that I should have continued with what I was saying before I come into this. So when I moved, I think I went to the States for the first time in 2021. After all this, it's like, oh shit, I've got to get Uber again, open up a new account, new email, right? So when they sent me this thing, they said, like, I'll put in the contact email, and I put in my old email of the old accounts in reference to this new account. Straight away, they're like, oh, you've violated terms of service by having 2 Uber accounts banned, right? And so for a short amount of time, because what I also found is how they do this is by handset. So of course, first thing I thought, okay, I'll just create a new account, new credit card, new email, right? But they actually identify you by handset. So I ended up like banning like 6 emails and 6 different like credit card numbers. So I was kind of like banned off Uber for I think it was like about almost a year until I like managed to like figure out, get another bank account or another card number, another physical phone, another email, and set it up that way, right? So it's just an example of like having experienced that, like how difficult your life can be. And not so much like in a Western country where there's alternatives to Uber, but for example, when I've been to places like El Salvador, if you want to get a ride through a rideshare app, there is only Uber, and your alternatives to like try and track down a taxi driver, which is like, man, if you need to get to the airport somewhere immediately, it's very difficult, right? And that just shows you as an example, like for something like Uber, if we were to take Uber and say all ride sharing apps, how difficult would your life be without ride sharing apps? Right now, be probably quite a bit difficult. Like some people less if you've got a car or whatever, but if you didn't have access to that service, right, the quality of life that you would have is certainly quite diminished from what we expect or what we come to know, right? And if you were forced to make that choice of like, out of principle, you're going to give up all ride-sharing apps or ride-sharing services because of something you believe or you don't like what the companies are doing or something like that, right? It's very hard to give that up and to if you want to go live on a mountain, by yourself, whatever, sure, but like to have a normal existence, particularly in a city, very hard to do, right? And so, I think firearms is one thing, but what's far more pervasive and real is all these other things which become so enmeshed in our life where you don't need Uber to live, you can eat without it, but how hard is it for you to get the groceries to eat without Uber? How hard is it for you to go about these kind of things to, maintain your social life, to maintain the quality of life, what you expect to have without Uber, right? And people will fold, and they do fold very, very quickly. And it's not very hard at all for people to empower you to be in a certain way. And they don't need to use violence, man. They don't need to be like, coming to you guys with guns. It's just simple, soft power like that. And so, the world that we're talking about with I think when you're saying about like taking out electricity is a good metaphor to see it. But the real pervasive thing is you don't even need to get out electricity to make people's lives hell and for things to go to shit. You just need to like remove some of these very convenient optional services run by companies that can be easily pressured by the government without any of the recourse or like liabilities that governments have for providing these services to the citizens. And you can shape people's behavior and you can empower them to behave in a certain way very, very easily. And again, I think during COVID, you saw this like very, very clearly, right?
Yeah.
And so, the whole idea behind this, just like you might say you should buy a gun, in the States as an example, you should buy a gun and learn how to use it, even though you're probably never going to use it. It's the thing of like, if that time comes, even if you're not going to end up maybe shooting that person, the fact that someone threatens you and you don't just, like do whatever they say, someone wants to rape you, right? You don't just let them rape you. You say, I've got a gun and you pull it out. Maybe you don't end up pulling that trigger, but the fact that you had the option and that, changed the way that things goes, fundamentally changed your agency in the situation, right? And I think a lot of where things are going is they are trying to, in that situation, they are trying to, pardon their like rather extreme and graphic example, but they are trying to like rape us and remove all our ability to not be raped, right? And so the whole idea behind the stuff is like, it's not just what is lacking is not just the technology itself, but a philosophy behind intention choices of saying no or giving up things because of like understanding where it leads and the life that you want to live and the position that you want to be in of self-autonomy, right? Which is not always pretty and as easy as like choosing the alternative, but you can see where this road leads if you don't have a vision, if you don't have principles about what you will or will not give up and how you will or will not conduct your digital life in this sense. You can see where that goes, and it's a very dark place.
It is, yeah. And honestly, man, I've said this before, but at this point in my life, I feel so fucking lucky that I actually lived and grew up in a country like Iran because I know what that's like,
Absolutely do. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'd imagine you think like, oh, that was just like a dream, right? Or that's not relevant to the world we live in today, or my life is different now, right? But I think
Quite
like
the contrary, man. Honestly,
yeah.
it's very interesting to me because it feels like, let me try and unpack it for you like this. It's like I lived under this thing that at the time, and obviously still even now, appears to be this totalitarian thing where a bunch of people who I never elected are in position and they rule over the society, and if I say things that goes against what they're imposing, then that creates trouble for me. Well, I'm exactly in that same situation now. And this is something that I ponder about a lot, and of course, yes, there's like, you can look at the Western civilization, and you can, I listen, let's make one thing clear. I'm very grateful to be here. I'm very happy that I've had the opportunity to be here. And in all fairness, I've earned my position to be here as well. I've had to work very hard to be here. I'm not someone who just came on a fucking rubber dinghy, and then just got put in a fucking house with a bunch of people. That's not my story. I understand for some people it is, but not mine. For me, I've had to earn every step of the way, and it's been a very expensive, very heartbreaking, very stressful process. Okay, so make that very clear. But having been in a situation where I was, of course, always questioning of things, one funny story for you is when I was about, I think, 7 years old. It was my first year of school, because in Iran, we used to start it like a year later than everyone else does here. Prior to that is like nursery or like kindergarten, if you want to call it. And one particular day we were going into school and they were doing this whole like fucking propaganda thing that they were doing. And even as a kid, I somehow saw through it. I don't know how, but like I was like only 7 years old, and they placed this American flag by the entry door of the school. So when you would go in, you would end up stepping on the American flag to go in. And I was the only kid who skipped over the flag because I didn't want to disrespect it. I thought, America is kind of cool, But then the kid started shouting at me saying, "No, you need to go back there and you need to step on that to disrespect the infidels, the great Satan." And I kind of like sheepishly just like rubbed the tip of my shoe on it, and then just like kind of moved on again, and then they must have been looking at me like tutting, like, who is this kid? What was he like this? And I always like consider myself to pretty like pretty propaganda proof person. Obviously not perfect. But yeah, it's just something that I always thought about. And then I came over here and I had this conversation with Yoski as well when he was on the podcast. But to me, the very alarming thing was like as soon as COVID happened, and for the first few months I was kind of like, oh, okay, maybe, like, oh yeah, shit, this is dangerous. I hope they come and fix this. Wow. And then I was like, oh, hang on a minute. This government's not that different to the one in Iran. These guys are just as much of an asshole as those guys were. And then when they started, like the thing that like, honestly, I legit like feel upset when I think about it as well. When they were cracking down on like parties, like 10 teenagers just having a party and then going in there and then like charging them something, fining them something like 10 grand each, or like even in total, whatever. It was just like, how the fuck can you do that? That this is like identical to what the Islamic Republic were doing to us. I thought this was something that was just exclusive to our side of things, and then it's eye-opening when you realize, and then ultimately at the core of it is the realization of how truly possible tyranny is, of how close it is, and how you should make yourself prepared for it at every step of the way, regardless of your location, regardless of your identity in this world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know what? Like a really good dude to look at this stuff is I know you heard of this guy called Richard Stallman.
Oh, why does that name ring a bell?
He's a guy. He's kind of like a comical looking dude. But he's a guy that, man, like in the 60s was talking about this stuff, about like how technology will be used to control us and how like software that's not open to be able to be changed and like inspected by people is like this tool for control that will be used for these kind of things. This guy was like, man, like 30, 40, 50 years ahead of the curve on this shit. Like it's crazily prophetic, and yeah, like quite an eccentric kind of guy, like kind of comical, but like he's a really good guy to, I think, to like, and he's got a shitload of talks on YouTube and shit about this. You know, he's given so many over the years, but like a really good thing. It just really makes you reconsider that kind of stuff. Like it's the same vehicle of tyranny that, you know, this is just human nature, right? It's existed for thousands of years. So there's just different clothing, right? You know, it's the same behaviors, just in different clothing. And, you know, in the past, it's been more overt, more whatever. And now it's just more covert or more hidden behind 3 layers of things. But it's the same fucking behavior, because human beings are going to be human beings. You give someone too much power, not only are they going to try and extend that power, they're going to try and maintain it from people who are going to take it from them. And this is how they do it, like tyranny, man, you know. And people think it's different in the West, you know, but the whole basis of this thing is like governments are governments, man. It's like, and to be quite, you know, to be somewhat sympathetic to it, is like, if they don't maintain law and order for their order, then someone who is better at doing that will cause a revolution. You know, I'm sure, as you would have seen in Iran, right? You know, like some guy will come and usurp that power, and they will take it if they don't hold the fist down, right? And so the problem is not like one government or the other. It's the whole idea in and of itself. And these things exist. If you want to come back to firearms, you know, is a good example. You know why all this exists, and to talk about, you know, what you're saying about the collapse of society stuff, right? Is, of course, if people can't eat, what they do is they go and, you know, say, well, who has got some food, and we're going to go and we're going to take their food, right? Yeah. And this is how civilization fundamentally changed with agriculture. Is before agriculture, right? Everyone was a hunter-gatherer, and if you come across someone else, what if they got to steal, like maybe food for a couple of days, you know, however long their salted meat is going to keep or whatever, you know. So there's not really much of a value in being good at killing people or in violence in that world, right? But when agriculture came around, you got this big granary full of food. You know, there's enough food there for thousands of, you know, days. And so it becomes very profitable and makes a lot of sense to be very good at killing people, because you don't need to, like, or short-term thinking at least, you don't need to be good at growing food. You can just go steal someone else's if you're better at killing them than they are someone else, right? And this progression has led to the world that we live in today, whereby, you know, the whole way that, you know, governments and the whole system that we live in today is predicted or underpinned by violence, right? Is that, like, person with the biggest amount of aircraft carriers and soldiers and things like that gets to dictate what's happening in the world. Today, there's the United States, and that's why the United States military, the budget is so ridiculously big, right? Like, here's a little tidbit about this. You know, an M1 Abrams tank costs something to the level of, like, I can't remember the exact figure, dude, but it's not like fucking $10,000 an hour or half a day to run. And in Iraq, they leave those things running 24/7 so that someone can, you know, so that, you know, if they get attacked instantly, can get out of there. You just think about how much money goes into, like, underpinning violence and people's ability to protect things, right? And sorry to shift it back to what we were talking about before, but this is the beauty of something like Bitcoin, is that no amount of violence can solve a mass problem, right? You know, all the guns in the world can't undo a one-way hash function, right? They can't, like, undo maths. And when this is the power of encryption, you know, is that when you have information, you, in the past, right, you know, it was always in some castle or some fort, right? And march enough guys in there and you can get that secret information, right? You can torture someone and they'll give it to you, right? So, but, you know, when information becomes encrypted, it's like, it doesn't matter how much shit you have, you can't get that information, which is useful. But when money becomes information, when money is data and it's not a physical item, it's just data, that fundamentally changes the playing field completely, right? Because again, you know, if you look at, say, go back to Iraq, you know, they went in, they took all the gold from their vaults, you know, they just got rid of the banking system, right? And they have Iraq's money, right? You know, and sure, you can take the land and stuff, but if that money existed, let's say Saddam escaped with a truck full of that gold, he can finance the resistance movement, he can go in exile and, you know, fund some opposition government to do whatever, right? Money is a very fundamental part of, like, the choice of having action, right? You know, but when that is data, and not just data, but like with Bitcoin, that can be 12 words that you keep in your head. That just fundamentally changes everything, like everything about this whole thing, because no longer does it make sense to be good at killing people and violence, because like the payback is just not there, right? You know, you can't, because if you have the money and you can't take the money physically from people, then like all this violence only gets you so far. It's a tremendous waste, right? You know, so
Absolutely, man. And by the way, in Iraq, it wasn't just gold that they took, but it was actually Nephilim fossils. That was part of what they went in for. But that's a conversation for another time.
Fucking everything else, yeah.
That's it. Rigel, man, what a fucking conversation. This was
enjoyed it, man. Yeah,
I'm glad. I'm glad. We need to get you back on, you know, just so we can talk about other things perhaps, but this was fucking
This could
awesome,
go on
man.
for hours and hours, man. We didn't even touch on the music side of stuff, which, believe me, I can.
Oh yeah, we can go there. We can go there. Yeah. I can imagine all the guys sat there in their blasphemy patches right now going, what the fuck did I just listen to, you know?
Well, you would think hopefully
that
you would see the ideological correlation, right? Even though like we talked about nothing about middle. I think like this is adjacent, but very much in line without even referencing it, right? About like a lot of the same ideals. And I think
absolutely
also like a poignant one about our particular point in time and some of the bigger social shit that we talked about earlier, right? You know?
100%. I'm only saying that as a, you know, in tongue in cheek. I actually think that this goes very well in line with our lifestyle. You know, that's the thing. You know, we're just constantly seeking our own independence. But yeah, man, that was fucking cool. I'll definitely learn a lot of things, you know, and I would love to keep this going with you at some point. But yeah, is there anything you wanna share with the listeners? You know, to anyone who's made it so far, and anything in particular, any last words, as they always say?
No. Well, I mean, I guess maybe. I play in a band called Diocletian. We have a new album out called Inexorable Nexus, which you should go listen to, and that hopefully we'll see you on tour in some other part of the world, in Europe, seeing as we've just been there in the near future. So check that out. And the other one, I guess, like, yeah, my DMs are open, you know, on Instagram or Facebook, or if you want to get me on the old Twitter and other things, I go by like CoinSureNZ. That's more my Bitcoin kind of alias or whatever over there. So often people have questions about this kind of stuff and they want to know things, and feel free to send me a DM. And like, you know, sometimes takes a while, but I'm always happy to reply and help people and ask questions about the stuff. And often there is a lot. So yeah.
Awesome. I'm sure you're gonna get a few
and
of
just
those.
Finally, thank you very much for having me on and for the great conversation.
It's absolutely my pleasure, man. And thank you so much for your valuable time and taking time out of your busy day to do this. And fuck yeah, this was a blast. To everyone else listening to the podcast, hope you guys enjoyed this one, and we'll see you on the next episode of Iblis Manifestations.